one word accurately describes Easter Island, it is remote. It is 2,182 miles from the coast of South America and 1,289 miles from the nearest island, Pitcairn, whose 100 inhabitants are descendants of the mutineers from Mutiny on the Bounty. Easter Island's fame is much greater than its size would suggest. It is of a triangular shape, 14.3 miles wide and 6.8 miles long. The landmass is about 66 square miles, or about twice the size of Manhattan. By comparison, Nantucket is about 103 square miles. Easter Island, though a very tiny place, is considered by many to be a metaphor for life on Earth. There are only 2 sandy beaches on the island. The rest of the coast is composed of steep cliffs rising starkly toward the skies and sharp black rocks formed by volcanic eruptions. It has an unfriendly and inaccessible coastline. On each corner of the triangular island is an extinct volcano, whose ash and ancient deposits create an irregular landscape. The highest elevation on the island is 1,767 feet, the height of its tallest volcano. Volcanic caves pepper the coastline, often dark, eerie, and mysterious. When the first ancient settlers arrived here, Easter Island was a lush paradise covered with huge palm trees, now extinct. These enormous trees rose high into the skies, shading the land as their fronds danced in the winds. A smaller palm, the Toro Miro, also grew prolifically. These forests, with their giant palms, shrubs, ferns, and grasses, provided comfort to the vast number of sea and land bird colonies that inhabited the island. Today, the island is mostly bare meadow with scattered stands of hardy eucalyptus trees that can grow under the most adverse conditions. But these trees guzzle water and so are not the best solution. For the benefit of tourists, there are a scattering of palms and tropical flowering bushes, especially at the hotels and restaurants in the more inhabited parts of the island. Because of deforestation, the island has no rivers or streams. The irregular rains are soaked up by the porous volcanic soil, leaving little behind for thirsty vegetation. On the wind-swept cliffs outlining the island loom great rock giants, huge stone humanoid figures called moai. There are 887 documented figures standing, lying down, or in the midst of construction, abandoned at the quarry. Even when you approach the coastline from afar, their dominating presences, rigidly upright, facing the interior of the island, are a breathtaking spectacle. They are talisman to their ancestors, to those hard-working artists who carved and moved these monsters. Moai are what makes Easter Island famous. These colossal sculptures are huge and brooding. Their stern, gloomy expressions speak not of the joys of life, but rather its difficulties, and the hardships of carrying out the responsibilities of protecting their clans. Their heads are enormous compared to their bodies. Except for one kneeling statue, none have legs. The moai have elongated rectangular ears, long noses, heavy eyebrows, and sunken eyes. The sockets, now dark and empty for the most part, were once filled with light coral and black obsidian. Some wear huge head knots called scoria, carved out of the red volcanic rock. All are big, some are immense. The largest one, never finished, and never moved from the quarry in which it was being carved, would have been 69 feet long and weighed 270 tons at completion. The average moai weighs 12.6 tons and is over 13 feet tall. Easter Island has long fascinated explorers and scientists because of the many mysteries and unanswered questions about its culture and origin. Where did the original settlers come from? How did they find their way to this remote, unlikely place? Thor Heyerdahl, a Norwegian archaeologist and explorer, lived as a Polynesian while studying the local culture. He speculated that the original settlers of Polynesia did not come from Southeast Asia, as was believed by most scientists at the time. The Incas of Peru were known for their precise workmanship in creating walls of intricately carved interlocking stones. When Heyerdahl saw the sea walls of Abu Vinapu at Easter Island, he became convinced that the original inhabitants had come from Peru. The stonework is almost identical to that of the Incas, with its carved, rounded edges that fit so tightly together that not even a sharp blade can penetrate the seam. In addition, sweet potatoes were cultivated on Easter Island, a plant that is a staple of the Incas and not indigenous to the South Seas. How did it get there? But alas, technology proved his theory to be wrong. Today it is believed that the Rapa Nui, the first inhabitants of Easter Island, are part of the Polynesian culture which originated in Asia and gradually spread throughout the region. The Polynesians were skilled sailors, and even though the distances were great, they had the mastery and knowledge to travel to the far islands. In 2014, the DNA of 27 Rapa Nui produced the following results. The Rapa Nui were 76% Polynesian, 16% European, and 8% Native American. James Cook, the famous English explorer, arrived at Easter Island in 1774 with a crew member from Boro Boro, who spoke a Polynesian dialect similar to that spoken by the Rapa Nui. Cook and his crew observed other similarities between the culture of the Rapa Nui and that of other Polynesian cultures whom they had encountered. The presence of the sweet potato indicates that there was some interaction between Polynesians and South Americans. No one knows exactly what it was. Did Incas cross the Pacific in their balsa boats carrying the sweet potatoes? Or did the Polynesians make a trip to South America? Even with all the advances of modern science, this is an unsolved mystery. Another unresolved puzzle is how did the islanders move the moai from one place to another? These statues were transported as much as 11 miles from the quarry where they were carved to the ahu, their intricately designed bases on the coast. There were no horses or oxen, no cranes, no wheels, just rocks, trees, and ropes. The islanders believed that the statues possessed a divine spirit with whom a number of the very holy people could communicate. Through their mystical powers, it was believed that these humans could direct the moai to walk under their own power to their permanent sites. Current archaeologists fall into two main groups: those who believe that the statues were moved lying down, and those who believed that they were moved while standing up. The first theory hypothesizes that the moai were pulled by ropes, sleds, and log rollers as they lay on their backs or fronts. The other possibility is that the moai stood on their bases with ropes attached to their upper parts as they were rocked forward. This theory supports the oral history of the Rapa Nui. As the statues rocked forward, they might have looked as if they were walking, which is true. Another unsettled question is what caused the deforestation on Easter Island. It is estimated that the first settlers to Easter Island arrived around 1200 A.D. It was an unlikely place to settle, so far from all other islands, so small, with so unfriendly a coastline. And yet it is said in local legends that Chief Hotu Mata, the great parent, stepped out of his double canoe onto sandy Anakena Beach with his wife and extended family, looking for a new homeland. The settlers must have been delighted to be touching solid ground at last, because their trip was long, hard, and terrifyingly dangerous. To get there, they would have had to travel several thousand miles across an open, unexplored ocean. They must have come from a seafaring culture, one that could read the winds and the stars and navigate in heavy currents. And still, their courage even exceeded their great skills. They found a paradise, a land heavily wooded with huge palms and arable volcanic soil. There the family established a home and began to till the soil with the plants they brought, banana trees and taro roots. They also brought with them chickens and Polynesian rats, both of which they ate. Before long, they established a culture with kings, priests, clans, and an organized form of government. Very soon after they arrived, the deforestation began. The word in Rapa Nui for wood is rakau, which means wealth. Wood was an invaluable product. They used it for everything, for food, for palm bark clothing, firewood, heat on cool winter days, canoes, and perhaps for moving the moai. They also must have cut some trees to clear the land for their crops. By 1722, when the first Europeans arrived at Easter Island, it was completely denuded of the huge, luxuriant trees. Jared Diamond, a Pulitzer Prize-winning scientist, said that this was the most extreme example of forest destruction in the Pacific and among the most in the world. The whole forest was gone, along with all of its 65 species of indigenous birds. It is astonishing that the ancient Rapa Nui would have been so short-sighted as to plunder their heritage, to destroy without replanting, to fail to imagine what the island would become without its stately trees and nesting birds, and how their lifestyle would be diminished when the rustling of the fronds ceased to lull them to sleep at night and to wake them in the morning, when they could no longer find a shelter from the driving rain or the hot sun. Did they indeed knowingly participate in this destruction? It is also hard to imagine how the Rapa Nui could use so much manpower to create their moai. With a population of around 3,000, how many people were devoted to constructing, moving, and positioning the giants? Was this a national obsession? And did the Rapa Nui stop carrying out other important tasks to feed this compulsion? There is one important actor in this tale of environmental destruction, the Polynesian rat. Before the arrival of man, the trees on Easter Island had no natural predators, and so could bloom and flourish despite the island's fragile ecosystem. When the first settlers arrived, they brought with them, knowingly or as stowaways, the Polynesian rat. This small, innocent-appearing creature is only 6 inches long from its nose to the base of its tail, but its destructive powers are vast. A population of Polynesian rats can double every 47 days. A single pair can produce a population of 17 million in 3 years. They are mostly vegetarians, although they eat worms, insects, and eggs from nesting birds. On Easter Island, they found a wonderful delicacy, the seeds of the Easter Island palm trees. Scientists have found many ancient palm seed shells on Easter Island and have tried to regenerate them. Virtually all of them had been gnawed by rats, making their germination impossible. A huge population of rats can destroy a forest in a very short time if left unchecked. And there was nothing to stop the rats. What then destroyed the environment of Easter Island? Was it man in his blindness? Was it a huge colony of voracious rats? Was it these two in combination with natural climate change? Or was it a combination of all these factors? Currently, there are no definitive answers to these questions. The next mystery surrounding Easter Island is how did the destruction of the ecosystem affect the culture and viability of the Rapa Nui? No one knows exactly when the last living Easter Island palm died. The destruction of the forest began to occur soon after the arrival of the settlers, around 1200. Fossil pollen analysis indicates that by 1650, most of the trees were gone. In 1722, a Dutch crew led by Jacob Roggeveen visited the island. They found it denuded of trees, but fertile. The Rapa Nui were very friendly and presented the crew with sugarcane, sweet potatoes, bananas, and many, many fowl. The islanders were in very good health, strong, resilient, excellent swimmers. Moai stood erect on the shore, protecting the interior of the island, while natives performed rites before them. In 1774, James Cook, the British explorer, visited Easter Island. He described conditions as being less favorable than those reported by the Roggeveen expedition. Cook found the island to be barren. Although one area on the island was being cultivated with plantains, potatoes, sugarcane, and taro root. In their hike around the island, the crew saw only 2 or 3 large trees, one of which was one of the few remaining toromiros. There were few birds and few fish. James Cook was astounded by the moai and wondered how the islanders had moved and erected them. Many were standing, while some others were on the ground. The Europeans assumed that these huge statues represented ancestors and that their bases, the ahu, served as coffins. They found a skeleton partially buried in stones on one of the ahu. Cook notes that the Rapa Nui were healthy, active people. In 1774, they were making it, despite all of the island's disadvantages. Its aridity, its barrenness, the loss of its birds and fish. The explorer determined, however, that for Europeans, the island was not worth the trip, since there was no safe anchorage, no wood for fuel, nor any fresh water to take on board. 51 years later, in 1825, the British ship Blossom visited Easter Island and reported no standing moai. The culture of Easter Island began to change in the 18th century. The Rapa Nui stopped carving moai. Between 1774, the Cook expedition, and 1825, when the crew of the Blossom found no standing moai, some unfathomable events had occurred. Nearly all of the moai had toppled. It appears that some had had huge boulders placed strategically under their heads so that in falling they would be decapitated. Was it a civil war? Was it hostility between the different clans? Was it a series of earthquakes or hurricanes that might have caused great devastation on the island? A new culture arose on Easter Island. Maki Maki, the god of fertility, was elevated and became the chief deity of the Birdman cult. Petroglyphs, pictures etched in rocks, proliferated. There are 4,800 petroglyphs on Easter Island, depicting birdmen, animals, sexual themes, and other natural wonders. The most important event in the lives of the birdmen involved a yearly competition. The nobility chose the contestants from the bravest, most elite, and most skilled of the Rapa Nui men. This contest began at the stone village of Orango, high on the volcanic crater Rapakau. On one side of this village is a sheer 300-foot cliff. The rivals would descend the cliff, swim in waters filled with voracious sharks to the island of Motu Nui, and collect the first sooty tern egg of the season. The first person to return to Orango with this egg was the winner. The victor would go into seclusion for 5 months, grow his nails long, and wear a headdress of human hair. He was considered holy. For the duration of the year, his clan would gain many privileges, such as additional food and other tributes. Descending and ascending a sheer 300-foot cliff posed an enormous danger. Swimming twice across a channel filled with ferocious and hungry sharks was terrifyingly hazardous. The strong ocean currents threatened to pull the swimmers out to sea. Nevertheless, each year there was a winner, and each year there were losers, many of whom did not survive the competition. From the testimony of visiting explorers, the people seem to have been living a normal indigenous life. What undeniably brought the Rapa Nui culture to the edge of extinction was the rapacious greed of human beings, mostly European in origin. This fact is not in dispute. Slave traders arrived at Easter Island around 1862. Over a number of voyages, they abducted all the strong men and brought them to Peru to work the gold mines. They seized around 1,400 people, estimated to be 1/3 to 1/2 of the total population. They plundered. They kidnapped the priests and the holy men, the workers and the noblemen, the laborers, artisans, and the aristocrats. They took all the able-bodied men they could find. The squalid conditions of the slaves' imprisonment were so adverse that all but 15 died of hardship, tuberculosis, malaria, and dysentery within a couple of years. International protests broke out, led by the Bishop of Tahiti. The traders agreed to repatriate the few remaining slaves. It would have been a blessing if all the slaves had stayed in Peru, because repatriation was fatal. The ex-slaves brought malaria and tuberculosis with them. Soon an epidemic broke out, killing over 1,000 of the remaining islanders. By 1877, only 111 Rapa Nui remained. The Rapa Nui lost more than their population. They also forfeited their collective memory. They had had a written language called Rongo Rongo, a glyph, similar to Egyptian hieroglyphics. Only the chosen could read it, the noblemen and the priests. All of them were dead, leaving no one who could decipher this language. A couple of dozen wooden rongo-rongo tablets in various states of decomposition were found on Easter Island. All are dispersed to museums in different corners of the globe. Linguists have tried and failed to translate the script. The history of Rapa Nui is therefore shrouded in mystery. There remained no one to retell the tale. Chile signed a questionable treaty with the Rapa Nui in 1888 and took over Easter Island. From 1888 to 1960, the native population was relegated to the only town on the island, Hangaroa. The rest of the island was a restricted sheep ranch. The Rapa Nui were not permitted to enter their ancestral lands while the sheep wandered freely. In 1966, the Rapa Nui gained Chilean citizenship and the island was reopened. Today, there are about 5,000 inhabitants on Easter Island, half of them transplants, mostly from Chile. The other half are the descendants of the 111 Rapa Nui who survived slavery and disease in 1877. There is an independence movement on Easter Island. Some of the Rapa Nui would like to secede from Chile and go it alone, but that poses many problems. This is an island so small that it may need a larger entity to support its infrastructure. Over 70,000 tourists visit the island per year, creating a vibrant economy as well as many environmental hazards. 42% of the island is a United Nations World Heritage Site. Through this international treaty, the moai and the environment of the site are protected. The islanders can make low-interest loans for the preservation and restoration of their precious statues. They can hire experts and train staff. This agreement helps guarantee the permanence of what is left of the Rapa Nui culture. Even after the near tragedy of cultural extinction, the population and culture of the Rapa Nui has reflowered. Despite all of their losses, the islanders are proud that their history is such a fascinating one that 70,000 strangers fly endless miles to partake of their heritage each year. That they survived and that there are 2,500 of them, almost as many as at their peak, is a triumph. Professor Sue Hamilton of UCLA says of the Rapa Nui, their story is one of ingenuity, resilience, and resourcefulness. They now must use these qualities to create a sustainable environment, one that can accommodate the tourists and the population. If the past is prologue, they will succeed.